Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mansfield Center Dialogue. My name is David Bell, and I have during the day the privilege of leading the men and women at ALPS, and we're the largest direct insurer of legal malpractice in the country. And I also have the privilege of serving on the board of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center. And the Mansfield Center is the center hosting you this evening. And the center is an academic unit of the University of Montana, which is based right here where I am this evening in beautiful Missoula, Montana. The center is dedicated to ensuring a mutual understanding between the United States and Asia and to fostering ethical public policy and leadership. Established in 1983 with an endowment from the United States Congress, the center honors the legacy of Senator Mike Mansfield and his wife, Maureen. Mansfield was the longest serving Senate Majority Leader, and his reputation for leading with civility and cross-party collaboration remains an inspiration to this day. And that's what the Mansfield Center focuses on: civility, civil discourse, bipartisanship, and cooperations. Words that are not often used to describe Washington these days, but it is happening in underreported pockets. And the group that has been leading that effort for more than a decade is here with us tonight. And so I'd like to introduce to you No Labels and the three speakers that will be with us this evening. The Mansfield Center is interested in any organization that is promoting or committed to civility and civil discourse. And we're pleased to bring you information about those types of endeavors. And No Labels is the definition of that. No Labels has taken the difficult but essential project of building this divided country back together. Over a decade ago, after a career working in Democratic politics, Nancy Jacobson founded No Labels. Since then, she has been working to bring Democrats, Republicans, and independents into a governing coalition of elected officials, businesses, and citizen leaders, committed to finding two-party solutions to America's toughest problems. They created the 58-member House Problem Solvers Caucus, half Republicans, half Democrats, and the bipartisan group of Senate allies that were the force behind the passage of the historic bipartisan infrastructure bill last year, major gun safety and innovation bills this year, and numerous other essential bipartisan legislative efforts over the years. But now they are turning their sights to 2024, and they have an exciting and frankly unprecedented idea to ensure America has a good choice in the presidential election. So I'll turn it over to Nancy in a moment, but joining Nancy as well is her colleague, Ryan Clancy. And Ryan is the chief strategist at No Labels. Ryan leads the development of policy communication for No Labels. Ryan has helped some of the world's most respected leaders and organizations tell their story, serving as a speechwriter for cabinet officials in Washington, D.C., ghostwriting books, developing corporate narratives for Fortune 500 companies and CEOs, and advising political reform groups and candidates on all facets of communication strategy. Also joining Nancy and Ryan is Chris McNulty, and Chris is a VP of Political Insight as Causeway Solutions. Now, prior to joining Causeway, McNulty served as the political director of the National Republican Committee, where he rebuilt the field program from the ground up. RNC Chairman Reince Priebus referred to McNulty as a transformational political director for the multiple advances he instituted within the party. Nancy, Ryan, and Chris, it is really a pleasure to have all three of you here this evening. You have done extraordinary work through the Problem Solver Caucus and other initiatives for well over a decade. And now you have something really new and exciting. And I think you're going to share both that and your historical work with the Problem Solver Caucus and other this evening. So Nancy, I'll kick it over to you, and welcome to the Mansfield Center Dialogue.
Great, and thank you, David. And I know, Ryan, if we can see you and Chris here on the screen, but really appreciate it. It's such an honor to be able to speak before this group. You really said it right. I mean, 2010, we launched No Labels. We launched it at a meeting with 1,000 citizens from all 50 states. And really, it was in response, it was right after the Tea Party. And we could see that the two sides were warring with each other. And really what we wanted to do was take the temperature down and try to find a way that our leaders could with one another. I mean, when we started this, none of the Republicans or Democrats ever had any reason to meet, break bread, sit, talk, get to know each other. So this really started as informal meetings with the Republican members in the House, Democratic members, and slowly these legislators, I mean, when you get legislators together, what they want to do is legislate. So slowly they started wanting to work on ideas, work on bills. And this thing started to just keep evolving and keep growing. A guy by the name of Josh Gottheimer, who I think congressman who spoke before this group came into Congress, and we knew that he would be a leader that could really take this organization to the next level. So we ensured that he was able to take this over with, at the time, Tom Reed, now with Brian Fitzpatrick, and they just started to put so many ideas on the table. They've had tremendous success. I think the best innovation that we had, and this is simple matchmaking, really, when you think about it, just a simple idea, putting these relationships together. But I think our best innovation was when we started introducing the House members to the senators. Because if you thought that the Republican and Democratic House members never spoke to each other, House members and Senate members never spoke to each other. And so we started making those introductions, started making those matches. And sure enough, that started leading to lots of legislative activity. The infrastructure bill was a byproduct of this. The COVID relief bill that was bipartisan was a byproduct of this, and many other concepts. So that's been very gratifying. And we sort of stay behind the scenes. They really do this great work. But about a year ago, we looked on the horizon and we realized that we may be facing in 2024 an unprecedented moment that we've never seen before, when it's possible two people are running for president that maybe don't have the ability to unite our country, may be unacceptable to the majority of Americans. And so we have embarked on a project to ensure that there will be the ability for an alternative ticket to compete in that election. And if it's okay with you to set the stage for this, we have a very short, I think 2-minute video. We could just show you. It's a mood setter. It gets people prepared. And then if I could throw it over to my colleagues, Ryan, Clancy, and Chris McNulty, they'll talk everybody through a 10-minute deck. So David, if that works for you.
That sounds great, Nancy. And for everybody watching this evening, I'll just invite you, as you have questions, feel free to enter those questions into the chat. And at the end, we'll spend a substantial amount of our 45 or so remaining minutes talking in Q&A. So please submit questions if you have any. And Nancy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. So if we may, Ryan Clancy, who I've been working with him for about a decade on this project, and Chris McNulty, will hand it over to you to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, David, and the team at the Mansfield Center, and all of you for joining us tonight. We are going to pull up a couple slides here in a moment. Here we go. So Nancy just gave you a great description of how we got here and conceptually where we're headed. Chris and I are going to walk through a little more granular detail of what we think this is going to look like. But everything we do here is really informed by a sense of urgency and our feeling that as bad as things seem in Washington now, we really do fear they could get worse after the midterms. It's really not hard to imagine Republicans taking over the House and then us spending 2 years with investigations going into the former president in one direction and the current president's son in the other direction. And before you know it, this cycle we're in, or if you go to the next slide, that over the course of this summer led to somebody trying to kill a Supreme Court justice, led to somebody trying to kill FBI agents after the Mar-a-Lago raid. This is not, in our view, the kind of gridlock and polarization No Labels used to talk about and lament when we launched a decade ago. This is something different. And if you go to the next slide here, we unfortunately do not see leaders emerging on either side at the moment with either the willingness or the inclination to bring this divided country together. And that's why we have been planning for this project that we often talk about as an insurance project for the country. If and only if we need a third option come 2024. But of course, anytime you talk about an effort like this, the first question anybody would ask is, can it win? And if you go to this next slide, we think it can, and this is why. What you're looking at here is about a year's worth of polling and modeling that we've done to ask a very simple question, which is, could a unity ticket, that's a Democrat and a Republican, win in a race against two divisive major party nominees? And I want to define what we mean here by winning. As a lot of you likely know, to win the presidential election, you need 270 votes in the Electoral College. So 270 is the magic number. And No Labels has identified 23 states representing 279 electoral votes. Those are the states you see in yellow on our screen, where we believe a unity ticket could get a plurality of the vote. And that phrase plurality is really important. These are all winner take all states. So if you win 34% of the votes in these states, you get all of the electoral votes that come with it. And we think a unity ticket could win enough to clear the 270 and win outright in the Electoral College. This next slide will show you a little bit more detail on where the voters come from in these 23 unity states. So about a third of them are people who voted for former President Trump in 2020. About 40% are those that voted for current President Biden in 2020, though only about half of them are Democrats. The other half are independents and Republicans. So that at a very high level is why we think there is a path. I want to take you to this next slide to start to walk you through how we actually build the path. And when you're talking about an effort like this, the single most important thing is something called ballot access. And so every election, the Democratic and Republican parties, because they're called major parties, they're classified as major parties, they automatically qualify for the ballots in states across the country. But anytime a competitor wants to come along, they have to do a very logistical and administrative and expensive effort to get ballot access. And the way you have to do that is by just gathering signatures in states across the country. And No Labels actually has already started this work. We are going to do about 11 states this year. If you go to the next slide, we're going to do about another 20 or so states in 2023. And if you go to the final slide, these are the states we're going to do in 2024. We already have all the money raised or pledged to do this. We have a great signature gathering firm that's been doing this for decades. It's all they do. And we're very confident we're going to reach this goal. One thing that probably be of interest, especially to the folks on this call, for about 40 states, what No Labels does up until the first quarter of 2024 is we are effectively just getting a placeholder. We're basically saying there's a line here that we can fill in later with whomever we want to put on that line. But for another chunk of states, and Montana is included in that, you actually have to have a named candidate when you get your ballot access. That will be done in the early to middle of 2024 by the campaign itself, should they ever run. The Unity ticket itself, they would sort of take this final signature gathering effort over the finish line. So that at a very high level is how we're going to get ballot access. This next slide gets at how do you choose who might go on that ballot line? Who might you offer your ticket to? This is something that is very much a work in progress for us, only because there's so many different ways you could potentially choose a candidate. If you even all think about all the different systems you're probably familiar with for how parties pick candidates in the primary season, there's caucuses, there's primaries, there's open primaries, there's ranked choice voting. So there's any number of ways people can choose candidates. What No Labels is trying to do is develop a process that is both inclusive and transparent, but also has some guardrails on it to ensure that whatever candidate funnels to the end of that process is one that really does fundamentally reflect our values. So much more to come on this. We're working on it, but we'll get this right. What you're looking at here is a poll we did of 14,000 registered voters in those 23 target states I mentioned earlier. This is the summary of the policies that really resonated most among voters in these key states. This is just at this point a mirror. This is where they stand. This is not No Labels agenda. No Labels is over the coming months and into 2023 going to be developing a unity agenda, but we'll very much use these findings as a North Star to sort of figure out where directionally is the public. Now it's our job to turn this into policies that are compelling and cohesive, that kind of hang together and have the same kind of resonance as, you know, something like the Green New Deal on the left or Build the Wall on the right. Ideas that immediately, whether you like them or not, you immediately know what they're all about. We need to find that same kind of thing for this space. That takes me to my next slide, another polling slide here. One of the things, if you don't have a named candidate to poll, you do something called a straw man poll. So what you do is you will ask survey takers, you'll offer them a kind of different descriptions of a candidate. That's called the straw man. And in this case, to that universe of 14,000 voters, we tested about 4 straw men to see which one did best, what candidate profile did best. This was the strongest performing profile in the 23 states. It's an independent who will be strong on foreign affairs, defend the First Amendment, stand for a more balanced budget, and crack down on crime and illegal immigration. That right now is the strongest profile in these states. That can and probably will change as we go on here. In fact, we'll be doing another polling and modeling exercise after the midterm elections this year to test these assumptions, see what's changed. Obviously, as all of you know, things can shift in politics very quickly, and we want to make sure we have a real-time understanding of where voters' heads are at in these really key states. So that takes me to the third big plank of what we're doing, which I want to hand over to my colleague, Chris McNulty, to talk about, and that is our efforts to build a grassroots movement.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you all for taking the time to join. Ryan talked about getting on the ballot, talked about policy positions. Our next task was was identifying what the path to victory for such an effort would look like. We were asked to do a national modeling project for no labels for two purposes. One, to just provide no labels with the base data set so that they would have their own voter file, the ability to communicate with any voter anywhere and understand a good bit about those voters, but more specifically to analyze what a path to victory would look like and what the support levels would be among who for the concept of a national unity ticket. This national modeling project, give you a little bit of a summary, as we talk about here, unity ticket core supporters. We identified 64.5 million people who were out of the 207 million or so registered voters in the country who would support the concept of a national unity ticket. What's important to understand about the way we asked the question is that we consider this 64.5 million very much the foundation of the House, something to build upon. We asked a very simple question: would you support a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat on a national unity ticket, or would you stick with your Republican or Democrat choices? So we didn't name names. We didn't use words like radical or left or right. We just wanted to understand the base support for a national unity ticket. Identified 64.5 million people. A few interesting takeaways from that 64.5 million. Number one, their partisanship. Roughly a third, 33.9% Republican, 35.4% Democrat, 30.7% other or independent. So it's a very balanced group of voters, number one. It's sizable, 64.5, but it's also very broad across the political spectrum. 60%, not surprisingly, maybe 60% of that 64.5 million comes from individuals that are, we would consider swing or just kind of leaning Republican or leaning Democrat. But almost an entire 40% of that 64.5 comes from hard partisans, people that would otherwise be voting straight ticket Republican or straight ticket Democrat. So that 64.5, that foundation of the House, if you will, your base of support for this movement is balanced, it's sizable, and it's broad. In addition, for like any movement, a couple other models that we did, we identified potential donors, potential activists, knowing that all of these things would come into play down the road. This movement will have to build, interestingly, from the middle out. Most political movements start from the far right or the far left and kind of start talking to folks in the middle later in the game because they have a base. In this case, we're going to try to go from the middle out. I'm going to start you on the right here. These are three real profiles with the data we have, not the likenesses of the individuals, but three real profiles of individuals and a good example of the type of voter that we'd look to attract. First of all, the woman on the far right, 66-year-old Hispanic female in the Dallas area. She has a strong unity ticket score, 61%. And what we see in the rest of her numbers is that she votes Republican a little bit. She votes Democrat a little bit. She's a soft social conservative, soft physical conservative. She very much wants compromise over gridlock. This is the kind of voter representative of a whole heck of a lot of the electorate that's sitting in the middle, doesn't really have an affinity to either party, and is just kind of searching for a home, if you will, a political home. Very much kind of a foundational supporter. But then we're going to have to attract Republicans and Democrats as well. The gentleman in the middle, 79% unity score, so a very high score as far as support of the national unity ticket. Likes Trump's policies, but doesn't like Trump. His party score, Midland, he doesn't really strongly identify as Republican, but he ends up voting that way in a binary choice. Similar to, or the inverse with this woman on the far left, 53-year-old white female in the Denver area, very, very strong unity ticket score. She supports the idea of a national unity ticket. She has a mild affinity for the Democratic Party, but in the binary choice ends up voting for a Democrat there. These are good examples of the type of voters that we're going to have to build this coalition around and how we're going to use data to do that. And Ryan, I'll go back to you.
Thank you, Chris. And we're going to close out here with a few last slides before we open up to your questions. In a lot of ways, this is the most important slide because I think it addresses the concern that is often on the minds of anybody who hears about this, which is the concern that any kind of third alternative would inevitably lead to a spoiler campaign, much like Ralph Nader, in the famous or infamous 2000 election. If that's where we see this going, then we won't do this. and I think that's a really key point I'd like everybody to walk away from. If we get to the spring of 24 and one or both parties put forth pragmatic candidates that most of the country finds acceptable, if nobody up in between them is really catching momentum, and this just doesn't look like it's going to be anything better than a spoiler effort, then we pull the plug. The thing, though, that makes this worth doing for us, aside from the insurance policy aspect, is if we do pull the plug on this, the assets at the presidential level, the assets we just talked about building, the voter file in particular that Chris was just talking about, that will be such a valuable organizing tool to help us mobilize, target, and turn out voters who share this kind of politics in House races, in Senate races, where turnout is often a big problem, particularly in the primaries, where those are often the only elections that matter in about 8 out of 10 House races, because most districts in this country are now pretty red or pretty blue. And so this tool right here will be really valuable in getting more voters who share this kind of politics out to vote in primaries and elsewhere. And that, of course, is going to, on balance, going to give us a better set of representatives and senators in Washington. So I want to close with 2 final slides here. And this gets at, oh, I think we're actually all done there. So with that, David and team, happy to kick it back to you all for any questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And I'd like to make sure we circle back on some information about the Problem Solver Caucus, because I think that's such a. But I'm going to defer that because I think I can tell from the chat stream that's coming in that people are very much interested in the insurance policy, and so I want to kind of keep us there, but then circle back, because I think the Problem Solver Caucus, and we did have the then chairs of the Problem Solver Caucus on a Mansfield dialogue several years ago, and the outpouring that we received from attendees was amazing, because it was such a rare example of unity and hope, where 2 individuals who had pretty rigid and different ideological preferences, nevertheless had deep respect and admiration for one another, and therefore were committing to trying to make things work. And I think that that's the foundation upon which you've built No Labels. And so I do want to give that some airtime, because I think those who aren't familiar with the PSC would benefit from it. But that being said, you just run us through a very detailed approach of kind of this third-party presidential ticket ambition. And I'm just going to ask, I'm not a media person, so I don't have to even pretend to be unbiased. I'm a center-right Republican, so I'll kind of bring my questions with a little bit of a disclosure on that bias. When I've talked about this concept since learning about it from you folks not too long ago, inevitably the Republicans that I speak with assume that it's going to draw from Republicans and virtually assure the election of the Democrat, Biden, or if not Biden, whoever the Democrat is. And when I have the conversation with Republicans or with Democrats, they assume the exact same thing in reverse. Because frankly, in our nation's history, third-party tickets have served as a spoiler, but there's a real sense that kind of Perot dislodged some voters from H.W. Bush, and then they never were kind of reunited with Bush after Perot blew up. And so I'd just like to, I know you touched on it, but I'd like to just ask you what you would say to anybody viewing this that fears that a vote for this type of a third-party ticket would be a spoiler vote that would help aid the opposing party.
Ryan, you want to?
Sure. So David, I'd give you 2 answers to that. So the first is, and this is important, for the next 12 to 18 months, what we're doing is building a road that we don't know if we're going to have a candidate that's going to come down. But I think the way we look at it is that if we find ourselves in spring of 24 and tens of millions of people are desperate for another choice, if nobody's done the work to do this, then it is too late. You can't go out and, get a couple million signatures in a couple of weeks. So that would be the first point. But to tackle more directly your question about the spoiler effort. You mentioned the Perot race, and we've really done a lot of digging into that as really the best modern analog for what we're trying to do here in some respects. And there's a couple really key differences between that race and now that suggests that there's more of an opening here than there was then. So in 92, some of you may not recall this, Perot was actually leading in the spring of that year. He then suspended his campaign, came back in, and he and his VP notably made some really big mistakes. And in the end, they got 19% of the vote. Well, what's different about then and now is two really big things. In retrospect, Ross Perot was running against center-right and center-left alternatives in Presidents Bush and Clinton. And so he didn't really have as big of a gap up the middle to exploit because the major party candidates were relatively close to one another. And so our go-forward scenario this time looks much different than that. We only go forward in the environment where there's a really big gap, and it's clear that voters find both major party options really unpalatable. The second thing is, and this is thanks to research Chris has done, is when Perot was running for president, 33% of the American public identified as independents. Today, 42% do. So that's another 9 percentage points, or about 25% more. So there's a more fertile ground, more voters right now are primed for this than they were 30 years ago. And the candidate dynamics would also be likely a lot more favorable to it too.
That's helpful. Thank you. And the chat is alive with curiosity for more specificity. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of these questions, but before I get to asking you to drill down a little more on what you might envision this pair of individuals to look like, right? Or presumably a Republican on top, Democrat on bottom, or vice versa. Don't know. Let me just kind of call the elephant in the room because it's kind of obvious, right? There is President Biden, our current president, and let's just call him running for re-election as a yes with a question mark. I mean, that's just my term. And let's call Trump a question mark with a yes. I mean, we don't know, but those are the two players that everybody is focused on and a lot of people are worried about. And so can we talk a little bit about scenarios, Trump runs or does not run, right? It's going to be a binary outcome there. And, DeSantis is kind of the name that's being talked about most often. So there could be a scenario, if you're willing to entertain this hypothetical where Trump decides not to run, DeSantis does, it's DeSantis versus Biden. And then, of course, if Biden doesn't run, then it's kind of a real big, almost unprecedented guessing game of who might slide in there. So can we talk a little bit about, your pencils down, because you described this, I think, accurately as unprecedented. It's not only unprecedented in its initiative as a third party, but it would be doubly unprecedented to have embarked on such an enormous undertaking and then put the pencil down right before it happens. That would be unprecedented. So can you talk a little bit about scenarios of Trump, no Trump, Biden, no Biden, maybe if you're willing, DeSantis in there, since he just seems to be the most talked about after the word Trump. I'd appreciate that, Ryan.
Sure. So we actually can't talk about named candidates for or against. And it's not because we're being coy, is because there's a legal prohibition against that for organizations like ours. So we can't be organized for a candidate or against a candidate. Here's what I can say. Ultimately, the arbiters of this, because we know that a term like divisive or, like that's subjective. Somebody that you may find divisive, I may not find divisive. The real arbiters of that is going to be the public. And so one of the data points I can give you is that a couple months ago, there's a polling outfit, and we use them quite a bit, called Harris. They asked a poll question, and it was, if you were faced in the choice in 24 of President Biden and former President Trump and a moderate independent alternative, would you be open to that alternative? 62% said they would. So that's the American public telling you they're pretty broadly dissatisfied with those two choices right now at this moment in time. 18 months from now, it's hard to say how they might think of either of those two or any of the other named candidates you brought up. But ultimately, that's what we'll be looking for is there a big enough delta? Is there a broad enough reservoir of dissatisfaction where the American people really want to do something that they don't typically do, which is vote for somebody other than the two major party candidates?
Okay, so in other words, it's not necessarily tied to if this person runs or doesn't run. It's tied to, your kind of measuring the public at that moment as in terms of their appetite for an alternative other than what the two parties have come forward with.
That's right. I mean, if the public, we'll be able to take the polls if the public does not see, if there's two unacceptable candidates, we'll know there's a pathway. I mean, we're not doing this, to spoil it. I mean, so that's why when Ryan went through the deck, we found the 23 states where the voters exist. I mean, let's remember, in a general election, it's winner take all. You win all these states if you just get a majority. In a three-way race, that's as low as 34%. So we found the states where the voters are open and willing and wanting a unity candidate. And if there's not a candidate that can unify the country, we would want to offer this to people.
Okay, thank you. So you've talked about how you're going to do it. You've just talked about when or if you're going to do it. And now I'm just kind of synthesizing just a machine gunning here of questions. There's so many commonalities in the who are we talking about, right? This is a very unusual experience for a prospective voter to be talking about an avenue without the actual candidate that they'd be presented. So I know you're not disclosing, I assume you haven't chosen, but can you kind of hone this in a little bit for us and give us some better sense of the criteria that you're going to ultimately use, how the selection or who the selection process, but even beyond the governance inside of No Labels of how the candidate selection will occur, I think as much specificity of the type of candidate. For example, is somebody who comes from current or former elected office, is that a positive or a negative, right? I mean, those types of things I think can help to bring into focus for the viewers this evening what they might see at the end of this story when the No Labels presidential slot gets replaced with a person's name.
Yeah. And we're going to always focus back on the issues, right? I mean, Ryan, there is a slide, and if McKinley or Sam wants to put it up, because it'll help you understand. I mean, we're going to find a candidate that corresponds to the issues that correspond to what the voters in the 23 states that would vote for this unity candidate and give them the majority vote and get the electoral votes. That's going to be requirement number one, right? I mean, which is interesting, right? You start with issues first, and then a candidate gets drawn. So, we're going to stay true to issues that the voters in these states that would be able to put this over the top want. So and obviously, the qualities. I mean, we're going to be running, and Ryan can talk about it, a national conversation with voters starting in the next couple of weeks after this election on the values they're looking for. So we're always going to get input, from the voters we want on the values they're looking for, on the, on the issues they want. Ryan, do you want to put a fine point on that?
Yeah, well, so David, what you just saw there was, of course, policy positions. And as Nancy mentioned, those are going to be central in the end to the kind of candidate that would get chosen. But even one step above that is values and the kinds of politics that the American public wants our next president to represent. And so Nancy mentioned this campaign that we're going to be kicking off. One of the things we're going to be doing over the coming months is doing a whole effort to bring in feedback to develop a No Labels value statement, which we would expect any No Labels member to sign, any candidate who wanted to be considered for the unity ticket to sign, to give you a sense of the kinds of statements that we think could be on there. Again, we'll have to see what the public wants. But it's not what their position is on immigration. It's something like, you can imagine a statement that says, I'm grateful that I get to live in a country where I can openly disagree with other people. Now, that's the kind of statement that 10 years ago, that would have been so obvious, you wouldn't even have to say it. But we're unfortunately in a moment right now where that's not so obvious, where there actually are extreme elements on both sides that actually don't believe in that. And so that's kind of the starting point. That's the threshold. You got to at least be able to clear that. And once you can do that, then we start getting into policies that are reflective of those values, and we kind of go on from there.
And, you know, it's interesting, David, this is, you know, we'd love to be able to hear from some of the folks gathered tonight, you know, what are the values of the candidates they want? You know, it'd be great. I don't know if we're able to do that here, where we can get some feedback, where they can put that in the chat, if they can also comment on the issues we put up. I don't know if that's possible, but it'd be great to know. And I just want to say, we would love it if, you know, you see the name McKinley out there, or, you know, it's easier than Sam's email, mckinley@nolabels.org. Really encourage people to, you know, if you want to sign up with us, go to our website or get more answers. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, but this is such a great focus group to understand where this crowd is coming from. We'd love to hear.
Certainly, and thank you, Eliz, for putting, and McKinley, for putting your email in the chat for folks. And so let me kind of keep us on track here, and I'm just watching these questions as they scroll by. So is it fair to say you're kind of reverse engineering the approach? I mean, traditionally, you know, a candidate pursues office, the candidate attempts to appeal to the broadest audience possible. I think one of the main reasons people are so cynical about politicians is because the candidate shapeshifts to appeal to whatever he or she thinks is necessary to win, and then they end up governing differently than they started, or they end up governing to everybody, which is, you know, equally problematic. So what you're saying is, you know, you're starting from the kind of front to back. You're establishing a path, and then you're picking the candidate to parachute in there and using it as an issues base. And so I was looking at, you know, Brian from Billings here just asked a good question about polling. I mean, polling has been a source of scrutiny. There's been some real challenges with kind of the predictive nature of some polling. To be fair, that polling has really been between candidate choices and a concern of the accuracy. Ryan, do you feel, or Chris, do you feel that the issues-based polling data you got is really not plagued by some of the challenges in predictive qualities of polling that we've seen in the last few cycles?
Chris, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it is inherently different. And there's two things here too, that it not only is kind of the issue-based polling that we've been doing so far different in that it's not candidate-based polling, which frankly people do change their minds on. There's a lot less changing. People won't change their minds nearly as much on where they stand on issues or where they are on their beliefs. Because of the nature of a campaign, people change their minds on which candidate they want to support. That's why we run campaigns in the first place. Also, the other thing I would say is that we've done a combination of modeling and polling, and those two are working very well together, and they validate each other as well.
Helpful. And somebody else just asked about the process. So in your 50-state ballot initiative, there is no primary. Is that fair? So, you know, normally there's a two-step process to emerge on the ticket, and can you just confirm that your approach skips step one? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why this is so novel. Can you imagine not having to pander to the extremes in a primary? Or, as we know, oftentimes, I mean, it doesn't always work this way, but it could work this time, where the extreme candidate, you know, makes it out of the primary. So yeah, we don't have to involve ourselves, and it's winner take all in every single state except two, Maine and Nebraska. It's proportional representation. So it's a whole different type of election.
Interesting. And do you mind if I ask, I mean, these types of endeavors are expensive. It must be very expensive to have gotten to where you are right now. And there's an expensive road ahead in front of you. Do you mind if I ask, you know, money questions. How much have you raised? How much have you spent? What do you envision the financial need being? How do you envision getting there? I mean, that really is the hurdle that is very difficult for any prospective candidate. And so if you're going to effectively jump that hurdle before you choose the candidate, that also is quite unique.
Yeah, I mean, to get to the launching pad, so that there is a launching pad that a candidate team could take over, and then they've got to run their own campaign. We're not going to run anybody's campaign. We just got to get the launching pad ready for the rocket. It's a $70 million over 3-year endeavor to get, you know, this whole operation going, to get the voting file going, the ballots going, all of that. You know, we are probably 2/3 of the way there. So, you know, there's a lot of interest out there. We spend a lot of our time, you know, talking to individuals. It's all individuals all across this country. It's hundreds and hundreds of people. And it's quite exhilarating. It's quite exciting that people, you know, they're open. I mean, why is there innovation in our country, in America, and every other discipline except politics? No one, you know, very limited innovation. And so, you know, we were talking with a group today, you know, I know that people believe sometimes that you can be a spoiler as a third party, but why aren't we the first party? Why are we considered third? You know, we believe it's the majority of people in this country. We're the first party, not the third party.
Yeah, let me just take a moment to observe, you know, for myself and for anybody who's watching here, regardless of what you think about this concept, that's a stunning accomplishment to have raised what you have raised and deployed what you've raised. I mean, I think no matter whether somebody supports this effort or opposes this effort, you have to acknowledge that it's real when those types of funds have been raised and you're that far along to making this reality. This is clearly not a concept. This is something that is very much on whatever stage of the train that you're on.
Yeah. And let's just underscore, this is one ticket, one time. That's it. We're not aspiring to be a party. We're not cowboys. You know, if the dynamics don't exist, we're just going to terminate the project. So that's also that makes us unique. And I just want to underscore, this is an insurance policy. And just like people insure their homes and their cars and all of that, you know, we're insuring the country and willing to know that maybe it won't work. Maybe we won't pull this trigger, because we're not going to spoil. We're only going to do this to win. And I want to let people think about it for a moment. Could you imagine a government with a Democrat and Republican walking down Pennsylvania Avenue in 2025 for a January inauguration with a bipartisan cabinet, with a staff that's bipartisan? I mean, what greater gift could we give this country if that's what's needed at that time?
Yeah, that the healing that could potentially be a part of bringing people towards the center, making concessions is, you know, it shouldn't feel as extraordinary as it does when you describe it. And I think which it probably just goes to describe the precarious nature of our current political climate. There's a question here, and I know we're drawing short on time, and so I just apologize to there's far more questions than I'll be able to get to. But, you know, somebody just asked you, you've got a path in 23 states to 279 votes out of the Electoral College. Obviously, 23 states, there are people on this call who are residing, including me in Montana, that are not part of the plan, so to speak. And so, I mean, is there any messaging? I assume as this launches, the effort will be pretty transparently focused on the states where you want to turn the 23 and not focused on the other states. Is there any kind of messaging that is necessary to assure the country that this is a national initiative when you're focused on very specific states?
No, I mean, listen, it's national because we're looking to get ballot access in all the states. And I think we're going to have some surprises. I mean, very conservative, by the way, those 23 states. There was several others that could have been. And think of it this way, if you have a candidate from one of the states, those states become in play. So this will be national. It has to be national because our job we would want to do this and have a ticket take this ballot over to unify the country. So that's the only reason why we would do this. So this is, I don't want you to get dissuaded by seeing, just sort of a smart strategy. That's just a strategy, but the ethos of this is to unite this country, this beautiful country that we all love. Ryan, any thoughts?
No, I think I just want to reemphasize that idea that we intend to be everywhere. So even if in the end we only think a ticket goes through a certain number of states, you got to play everywhere. You have to be everywhere, and even in states where we don't think a unity ticket is going to win, we know there'll be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people in those states who want to be a part of this politics and who would want a ticket like that to win, even though it's not going to carry their state. And Chris, who's running our voter file effort, can assure you, we will be talking to people in every single state, no matter where they are.
Yeah, it's essential.
Great. Well, we are kind of closing in, but I want to just take a moment or two to circle back on really the inspirational work that is the Problem Solver Caucus. And I think there are people on the call who probably are not familiar with it. And there's a couple questions that seemed similar to one another, really asking about how do you accomplish getting congressional members from opposite parties, particularly who are otherwise fairly ideologically entrenched. How do you get them to begin to work together and make concessions, since it is just not what anybody in this country sees from our media as occurring? Can you just give us a little bit of the secret sauce? And just, I guess, before I ask that, is it correct that the Problem Solver Caucus currently is 58 members and requires, as a mandate, you have to have an equal number of Republicans as you do Democrats? And so if a Republican, for example, wanted to join, he or she would have to wait until a Democrat joined at the same time. Can you give us a little bit of flavor? Because it is, I think it is really a bright spot in an otherwise highly polarized environment in Washington, D.C.
I'd love to say, David, that there's some really secret sauce here. The truth is this. What is the truth? The party leaders in Washington, D.C. don't want to introduce any of these members to each other. They don't want to have any fraternization, any work. In fact, they tell people when you get into the election year, if one of these senators is up for re-election, don't you dare work on a bill with them. So there's no rocket science here. It's just being able to connect these people. They just, for whatever reason, they're separated. It's a segregated society, in Washington, where the Republicans stay on one side and the Democrats. So there's no real secret sauce. It's just doing the work, building a room, getting them there. And now that we've gotten them there, when you put people together, legislators, they want to legislate. So it just naturally bubbles up. But I will tell you, and when we started this was our theory of the case. The real problem is the party leaders. And the party leaders, they like the perks of power. They like the big offices, they like the security details. They want to hold on to their power. You get a whole much better, office suite, all these other perks when you're the leader. And so to us, that was our theory. Everybody has their own theory why it's not working. And for whatever reason, it's not incentivized for them to make deals. And I don't know, I'd love Chris to comment on that. Chris, you've worked for Speaker Boehner, you've been in the House, you've been on the floor there. You tell us.
Yeah, I'll kind of combine both subjects, the idea of a unity ticket and that possibility, as well as the willingness of partisans to work with each other. It's my experience that the significant swath of probably both parties, I can speak more informatively about the Republican Party, the caucuses in the House and the Senate, the vast majority of each would rather be legislators, would rather work together, would rather find problem solve together. But because of the system, and even because of some individuals, they are pressured not to, and they can't feel like they can't get out of line. One of the kind of tangential things that I think could come out of a national unity ticket is providing cover for those people to come out of the dark and say, I'm going to go work across the aisle. I'm going to, try to legislate. I'm going to concede a few things in order to gain a few things and set a new tone. I think those people are waiting there. I think the vast majority of Republican and Democrat legislators are good people that want to do the right thing, that are there for the right purpose. The system kind of keeps them boxed up for a lot of them. And I think that can change, particularly with something like a reset of a national unity ticket if it comes to that.
Great. Well, thank you. And, just like there are so many different people with very different and strong beliefs about and worldviews and opinions about the best direction for our country, there's no doubt that same mixture of people on this call. And one thing that I suspect we all share is a sense of unease, concern, for some fear about the current state of our politics and our country. And Nancy and Ryan and Chris, I just want to thank you for being a part of another idea, another alternative, and being careful, being thoughtful and measured about how you may potentially deploy what may be a very important, influential asset into this process. And so I just want to applaud you for kind of leaning in and spending of yourselves to help make our country a better place where there's more civility, there's more civil discourse, there's more cooperation. We've got a lot of folks outside of our country who don't have our best interests in mind. We really need to thread together in those ways. And so on behalf of the Mansfield Center and the Mansfield Dialogue, thank you for being here with us this evening and sharing a little bit of your story and your plan. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of you on the call. I'm sorry I couldn't get to the chat, and we'll see if we can get those transmitted over to No Labels. Again, the No Labels information has been posted in the chat. Email address has been posted in there. If you'd like to plug in to their effort, I'm sure they would invite you to do so. But to each and every one of you, thank you very much for being with us here this evening. Nancy, Ryan, Chris, thank you for sharing, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.